Podcasting on YouTube. Thank you all very much for joining us. Have a pause of a few seconds while the video kicks in. Good afternoon and evening. Welcome. So, following up on homework from last time, Tom and I had a interesting discussion about the relationship between emotions and language. Maybe it wouldn't hurt for me to spend a few minutes. So I guess two things. One is going over our discussion of emotions and wisdom from last time. The other is that Tom put together or sent over a document about what was the title? Pragmatic Learning from Systems Theory. I forget what the exact title was, which I thought was a fascinating document, and I was thinking we could go over that. Anything else that people wanted on the agenda for today? Knowledge philosophy, that was the title.
Knowledge philosophy. Okay.
Yeah. Are you working in the desert sun or something, Ernest? I wasn't.
No, it's kind of cold here, so.
Okay. Yes, fall has finally arrived in California.
Yeah.
After brutally hot weather in earlier in the month.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago it was terrible.
Yeah. All right, so let me share the presentation that I sent to Tom. And this is just interesting as a technology piece, is this tool called Gamma. And it is a sort of AI first slide generator. So literally you go into the website and you type in like a title and how many slides you want, and it will generate an entire slide presentation based on that. And then you can interact with it and say, make it a different style or a different color and tweak it in real time. And they have a pretty clever slide ad that they do that. But anyway, I don't think I used this purely their AI, but I did sort of start with a discussion in ChatGPT about language and the role of emotions. And I think I used ChatGPT to generate the outline, and then I toss it into Gamma to make it look like cute slides. So this is the result of that. And so the idea was frame language in the context of an emotional journey. And specifically, the phrase was that the real value of language is it gives you a structured language for turning emotions into productive action. And I haven't looked at this in a while. I don't remember what it said, but yeah, I think this was, I'm not sure where I started from, but this is the idea of the journey that people are going on, is starting with the idea of attention and kind of walking through the ex-JEPA architecture of perceptions to cognitions to emotions to decisions. And then it sort of created little slides around there. And we don't need to go through this in great detail, but I do like the idea of tension, like in a narrative plot, as the thing that drives people forward and working through and acknowledging those tensions. And also, for me at least, it was useful to think through that I think a lot of what I've seen language used in is sort of structural tensions where we have a business problem and we're going to do that. But then think about how that relates to communal tensions, like we have a sort of a vague community that you're trying to align around something versus personal tensions, but I just want to use this for something that I am trying to do, like in my own journey of working through this tension between language and emotion. So anyway, this idea of the real value of the precision is to create a cathartic language that captures and sort of relieves the tension of these unexpressed emotions, and then turning them into clear terms, quantifiable metrics, a shared understanding, and actionable clarity I'm not sure where those terms came from, but I found that as a emotionally evocative way for thinking about language. And then including stuff around emotion. Um, and in particular, what I found when thinking about languages metrics, it's really a question of, okay, there's things that matter to me. Can I translate them into something we can measure? This was kind of weird, but that's uh, the idea going in there. I have no idea what that graphic is, but it's um, emotionally it felt about right, even though literally it makes no sense. Um, and then coming into decisions. So anyway, and then also the last stage, of course, is that you need to act and and refine and iterate in order to get better. So this was actually pulling from, I think, my wisdom improvement protocol, mashing that up with language, which is where I think I just literally loaded in or asked it about a definition of language, and then I loaded in my wisdom improvement protocol, and I asked it to create a presentation with this title. Um, I'll throw that in the chat if anyone wants to look at it. But I was curious, Tom, when you saw this, what was your reaction, either emotionally or intellectually, to that framing of language?
Don't have a problem with it. It's been a while, so I don't remember exact
Okay, but at least
emotions.
it was pleasant rather than unpleasant to see that
Yeah.
spin.
Oh, yeah. No, no. I can get violent negative reactions when I need to.
Ernest, did you have any thoughts on the presentation or even just Gamma itself as a tool?
Uh, well, I don't know. You guys have probably noted that I'm not too friendly with AI. I guess I will be the what are these people? The
Late
tailors.
adopters?
No, the tailors in England that refuse to use the
The
machine.
Luddites.
Yes, I am in this regard, I am that. Um,
Mhm.
it surprises me because, I used to be like, oh, technology in the future and all that. But yeah, when it comes to actually when any product says AI, it just puts me up. It's not something that is cool to me. It's the opposite. It's the exact opposite. Something says, oh, we use AI. Yeah, I don't like. Anyway, but I was wondering so you used some AI process to generate this presentation, and you mentioned that it's based on emotions, right? So did you map? I mean, uh, in this system, what is an emotion? Is it a, a an objective? What is an emotion in this system?
Sorry, I think so. The system I was using, so the conceptual piece of this was what we discussed last time as what I call the wisdom improvement protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll send you a link to that since it's been a while. And let me just share that document from before. So in this
Mm-hmm.
frame is that emotion is how my values interact with a particular concept. And so, like, let's take your example. Is that when the concept of AI comes out, your value of authenticity and humanity generates a negative emotion,
Yes.
right? And that feeds into then, that sort of a right brain process that feeds into your left brain goals. And I think this is really the interesting tension there because I'm not saying this is a great presentation, but it was a really helpful way. Like I had a concept in my head that I wanted to at least run past Tom, and it needed to be coherent and clear enough that he could have at least some sort of a reaction to it. And so for that trade-off of the amount of time and skill I had to bring to getting a quick response, it felt like spending 15 minutes to use an AI to generate it versus 2 hours for me to create it from hand was the right trade-off with my goals. Um, And that's the true of really any technology, right? Is that it is a trade-off of time and energy and outputs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the short-term thing of, do I want to solve this problem? And then there's the long-term thing of what kind of world are we creating, right? It could very well be that there's a short-term benefit and a long-term cost to me getting used to generating stuff with AI. And that is why we have values that are different than just mere goals, is that we have this like, ooh, I feel icky about this. Like maybe it's not a problem now, but I just don't feel good about it because the long-term consequences could very well be negative. And there is this tension between our values and our goals. And, this is an interesting way, at least for me, to think about the tension between them.
Mm.
And for example, this chart is
Mm.
another example of AI in that I did it in partnership with the AI where I'm really bad at doing diagrams. So I asked it to draw a diagram and then render it in a dot file. And then I manually edited the dot file and use AI to tweak it. So in this case, the diagram was something that I feel like I am the author of it and that I created it and got it to do what I wanted. But I used AI and a graphing tool, which both sort of shaped and constrained the way that I presented it. And let's call that micro AI, where it's more sort of an assistance tool versus sort of the macro AI of like Gamma, where it does the whole thing for you. And I suspect you have a aversion to both of them, but I think in the past you've at least had a grudging tolerance of micro AI as opposed to sort of a deeper suspicion of macro AI.
So you're saying macro AI and what's it? Micro?
Micro.
What's the big one?
Macro is big, micro is small.
Yeah, it's big. So you here in TVs, they say, yeah, the image is processed, whatever, and they, use AI freely, and I don't mind that. It's like, okay, you just processing the image and making it look better, the colors or whatever, and that I don't mind. But as soon as I use this term to determine how I think or give me information, it's that's what I find not great. Like, perfect example. I used to Google, things, hey, you Google that, you Google that term. Okay, yeah, you go through the results and no problem. I know there's an algorithm that somebody wrote, blah blah blah. But now Google is pushing this AI thing, and like the top part of the results, and I'm like, I just skip that, even though it might be useful, even though it might, it might represent whatever.
Yeah, what I hear is that
still hate it.
it's the disintermediation,
Mhm.
right?
And
Is that the idea is that originally Google was acting like an intermediary to take, human created websites and present them to you. And now it's sort of trying to get rid of the websites and pull the content and give it directly to you. And you have to trust Google more in a way that you did not want to have to trust them.
yeah, and they didn't ask me. There's no setting to take that. Well, I think there's no setting to take
There
that.
might be actually, but
And then Amazon is has this own thing in there, in the little circles with colors. That's AI, and all these other companies, they are just pushing that as is the new thing, when it is not the new thing. It just
well, it is the new thing. Whether it's a better thing is an open question.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And I think that's an interesting tension there in that, there is definitely every layer of abstraction, we lose something, right? Whether it's, growing our own food or, killing our own meat or relying on language versus direct interaction or the written word versus the spoken word or the digital word versus papers. And it is interestingly, I wrote a little AI story around this
Mm,
about about the hype curve. And in the hype curve, there's this tension between the innovator who has this wonderful new thing and the implementer who has a working system that he doesn't want to screw up.
mhm.
And the hype is like, oh, this is going to change everything. It's like, oh yeah, it doesn't actually fit the way that people work. And then the hype curve comes down, and then it's like, well, actually, if the implementer and the innovator actually work together and listen to each other, they can both end up in a better place. And that's how actual innovation works in the world. And I think it's a great question of whether, and one of the challenges is always like taking on debt. Like a company that takes on debt can grow much faster than a company that has a sustainable organic growth. Um, and depending on the context, sometimes the company that takes on all the debt and grows really fast crushes the organic company. And sometimes the leveraged company overextends itself and collapses, and the organic company wins. And sometimes both happen in that it wins and then it collapses, and you end up in a much worse place.
Hmm.
And like any new technology, any taking money or sponsors or whatever has this double-edged sword in that if you ignore it, there's a risk, but if you take it, there's a risk. And
Yeah.
how do we navigate that? And all we can do is sort of place a bet and deal with the consequences, knowing that other people are placing bets and we have to deal with their consequences.
Mm. And yeah, I see that as another level of abstraction that companies will take advantage of to skirt responsibility. Like even before AI or before it was famous, this thing, companies mess up and programs crash, and they would say, uh, well, yeah, we're not responsible. I mean, there's some engineering issue. Uh, they will come up with excuses to excuse that, right? But now that we have AI, they can just say, "Oh, the model is terrible. Yeah, we can't, vet all that." There's another thing in between my discomfort or my dissatisfaction that I cannot get to anyone that would take responsibility. Hey, who at Microsoft is responsible for the crash? That a few weeks ago there was this huge.
Yeah.
Who is responsible for that? I don't know if they fired somebody. I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, and I think remember correctly, there was a third-party integrator
mm,
which had a security system, and they pushed a patch that updated the system that was not properly vetted and it broke everything. And Microsoft, to their credit, I think actually took responsibility and didn't throw the vendor under the bus,
mm,
and they apologized and worked with people to remediate it. So in that case, and to be fair, it wasn't Microsoft wanted to close the security hole, but all the security vendors complained that Microsoft was locking them out. And so EU regulation forced Microsoft to allow vendors to do this. And
ah,
people voluntarily chose to use this vendor, right?
mm,
So it's a really awkward situation. But in that case, I think actually, it worked in that the customers who use this product got screwed and they're going to really think hard about whether they want to keep using that product. And Microsoft tried to take responsibility. Hold on a second, I got something on the call. Talk amongst yourself.
okay, yeah. So what's new, Tom?
Yeah, not much. It's winter time in Norway, so we're closing down the summer cabin,
Mm.
and I'm at my winter flat, and it's time to change to the winter tires on the
Oh,
Tesla.
oh, yeah. So not only electric tires, but also.
Yeah, soon we're gonna get some tires that have no air in them, right? Hmm.
Yeah, that's what they say. Like, yeah, you don't have to inflate them or anything.
I think they have such
Hopefully.
tires, but I think it only works if you're really, really worried about that, because it's a trade-off, right? Is that they work fine, but they wear out faster, or they're not as comfortable, right? And this is like everything else in life. There is a trade-off. And there's a fascinating fantasy story I read once where this guy gets transported into a D&D world, Dungeons and Dragons type of world, where people literally have to roll dice when they go out and fight each other. But the magician says, actually we can cast a spell to increase our luck, but it doesn't change the laws of probability. So what that means is that if I increase my luck here on one of my soldiers, I'm decreasing the luck on the other soldier, so that the average is still the same, but I can shift the luck so that a really critical battle wins and a less important battle loses. And I think a lot about that way in terms of innovation. Is there's always a price to be paid, but if you make the right trade-off, you win and get to move forward. And if you make the wrong trade-off, your competitor beats you. And thinking that we're always earning karma by our bad choices, but sometimes we win enough.
Earning or losing?
Earning karma
By your bad choices.
But by all choices.
Okay.
Or by the bad side of, like think about Apple under Steve Jobs. When Steve came, he had basically in 97 when I was there, he had basically a scorched earth policy. Any project that wasn't carrying its weight got shut down. Any person who he thought wasn't carrying the weight would get fired. There were literally, I think, was at least one person who, got in an elevator with Steve Jobs, and he said, "What do you do?" And the person told him, Steve goes, "That's ridiculous. You're fired." Which is a horrible way to make decisions. But the trade-off was that Apple was directionless, leaderless, and running out of money. And the trade-off of rapid decisions and decisiveness and conviction, even though I'm sure there were a lot of good people and good projects that got unnecessarily or unfairly hurt, was essential, because a bias for action and a bias for decisiveness was what Apple needed at that time. Because if he'd wasted the time to try and be fair and thoughtful, we would have just died. And so it was the right trade-off, but there was a karmic cost, right? And one of the reasons I left Apple in 2014 was like, is there a way to get really high breakthrough performance without sort of the brutal human cost associated with that? And I don't really have a good answer. And the reality is that, well, it probably depends on how much time you have and what the alternatives are. And so, which is actually a good segue to the article that Tom sent, which I'm actually very curious about your motivation and what you were thinking of when you shared that. Tom, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay. This is not something I'm deeply attached to. I found it and I thought it had some relation to what we were talking about, so I sent it over. So I would have to reread it or rescan it to comment on it properly. So in the meantime, I've sent two things to you guys. There it is. Got my own copy. One is a book called Happy, which I wrote, which is about emotional relationships and language. And the other is a paper I wrote called Penta about trade-offs. Okay. I'm putting him on the table.
We did discuss Happy last time. But I guess Penta, we did not.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot. Let's see. Okay, yeah, now I've got my paper.
We didn't touch on it, but we haven't.
Okay. Nah. Well, I don't know if this is interesting enough for you guys. I'll tell you what I've got here. He makes the claim that if two concepts have the same set of possible effects, then the two concepts are the same. And I find that statement is untrue.
So right, I think precisely he's saying from a util. Sorry, are you talking about Penta or the systems
No,
thinking
the
piece?
core maxim for systems thinking.
Yeah,
So I start off saying this guy isn't very good at logic
Mm.
or phrasing things because they are the same in the sense of the possible effects, but there's everything else uh, about them.
right.
For example,
Which to be fair, he declares his biases up front, right? He says that we prioritize practical outcomes and the consequences as measures of value.
good,
I think that's
yeah, and I
probably
like that. I like that, of course. I just don't. His statement isn't good enough logic here, and I think it's dangerous to teach such things. Here, this is simple logic. Two concepts can have different designs, but the same set of possible effects, right? And they're not the same. They have different designs, and that leads to changes in both of them may pan out in different ways because of the fact that different designs are embedded in the two things. I don't think this is very important for us, but if anybody wants to talk about it, I can. But I reacted negatively to it and said, I don't know if I'm dealing with a person I can trust.
Mm.
right. So the way that I look at the sort of idealism versus utilitarian or pragmatic dichotomy is what I say is to first order, consequences matter more than intentions. Or effect matters
Fine,
more than design. But to
fine.
second order, intention matters more than consequences. Right? Is that if you're just looking
Uh,
at the linear first order
yeah,
effects of something,
good.
then
No, I
looking at
like
the
that.
consequences makes sense. But in the second order, if I'm going to change the system, then that's where the architecture and the intentions matter.
Right. No, I can live with
And
those two
yeah, and I
ideas.
think that's one of the challenges of philosophy is that someone defined philosophy is trying to explain the natural world using natural language. And because of that, they tend to ignore like formal systems and complicated operational definitions, which is why I think it's important to, that was the idea of the wisdom and programming protocol, is that you have uh, the linear path and then the reflective path. Um, but I think that the thing I appreciate about the article is that I do hang out in circles where people tend to be very much like formal modernist thinkers, that there's only one truth and one way of looking at a problem. And as long as I have a logically consistent way of looking at the problem, nothing else matters, including the consequences of those actions.
Mm. Well,
And so it's a useful, if incomplete, counterpoint. Ernest, have you actually dealt? Yeah, yeah.
I see a lot of writings about systems thinking floating around, and I'm very unhappy about them because none of them do what I do in language, like show how to perceive the system, for example, with the quantified qualities. They just aren't at the practical level. They're at a philosophical blah 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 word salad level, as far as I'm concerned, and I have little respect for that. I don't. In other words, even if they're right about certain of their assertions, they're not helpful in the real world about what are we going to do when we're building a real system.
Yeah.
So,
And to his credit,
and
I think
and
that's what they are argue. I think they're um, in an oversimplified way. I think maybe this was the positive thing you saw, that they say like, oh, if you believe something, don't just give me the useless verbiage. Describe how that belief translates into practical consequences and goals. So at least in that sense, this is philosophically aligned with language.
yeah,
It's not enough
yeah.
to have a belief if you don't turn it into actionable, measurable consequences. I mean, I think you
I
would agree with this statement, right? To fully understand an idea, we must examine what experiences or actions it would lead to if it were true, or if it was chosen.
Mm.
um, could could you show me exactly where you're looking? Could you
Sorry, are
put a
you not seeing
cursor
my
on it?
screen?
Yeah, I see your screen.
Um,
Oh, now I see the cursor. Maybe I just right. Thank you. That's what I needed. That helps a lot. Uh, fully understand an idea. Okay, aha, fully understand an idea. Wow, that is dynamite challenge. Fully understand. I would go as far as saying we can never be sure that we fully understand anything. We cannot prove the
Right,
things we do know.
but I would say that maybe to the a more looser way we say, to the
But
extent we understand the consequences and
yeah.
implications of
If we
something
take
is
it
the extent we
loosely,
understand it.
yeah, if we take it loosely, to gain a better understanding or something like that, this fully understand through me, it would lead to, if it were true, that okay, no problem.
Okay, so
I
then
think he's not precise in his language enough for me
yeah,
to buy into it. I'm
he doesn't
afraid.
practice what he preaches. He
Yeah.
does not actually formally state his concept and work it out as an example because he's a
Yeah.
philosopher, and
Hmm.
philosophers, for whatever bizarre reasons, thrive on ambiguity. But
Hmm.
anyway, this is an interesting implication of this. Like, oh, yes, and this, his stronger claim is that this assumption or this premise implies pluralism, which I guess is your point, that we never fully understand anything. It's always provisional and evolving.
Yeah, right. Well, not only do we not probably always understand everything, but we cannot be sure that we understand everything, and we cannot be sure there's not something that we should understand, which destroys everything practical we're doing. We just, the yet unknown is a very difficult thing to deal with.
Eh, eh,
You know,
eh,
you there's
yeah,
or we need a proof of completeness. That a proof that you do understand everything would be an interesting concept.
and to that point, the article does in some sections says that to understand a system, you have to view the system from the point of view of another, and then you would get better assumptions, I think, and the system will be stronger. But which is
Ernest, that's good. But and then another I would call a stakeholder, but
mhm,
there's like almost infinite quantity of stakeholders, and every one of them will have a slightly different point of view. So the task of understanding system for any potential stakeholder is outside the boundary of what is practical. It tends towards the infinite.
All right, and I
But
think that's what, yeah.
you could limit it. You could say, for my top 10 stakeholders, I want to understand their top 10 concerns. That's what I do in language, by the way. Exactly that kind of sorting, prioritizing the top 10 and saying, I know there's masses of stuff out there, but I am going to ignore it so I can concentrate on the critical.
mhm,
Right. And the place is that, and I think this is the idea of a bet rather than this is a very subjective choice of who and what I care about. And what do I define as the boundaries of the system? Right. And I think that's what I think this guy's arguing for here is that, and I think this matches what I tend to remember. It might be might be a bit of a straw man, but the early systems theorists believed that their model was reality, and they
mhm,
claimed that their models were perfect. And there was certainly some of that going on. I don't know whether they were formally committed to that. And so, from this context, whenever he was writing, it's like, hey, we have to accept the fact that our models are somewhat subjective. Going back to the emotions, this is what I care about.
mhm,
This is the tension that I want to deal with. And, this is a practical problem for me, like at work. Like, we want to solve this customer problem. Okay, well, but then this problem is adjacent to this problem. Should we solve that too? And it's like, I can't solve everything or I'll never ship anything. And yet, if I don't ship something sufficient, then it's not any good. And trying to find that balance between, between uh, convergence and completeness is uh, hard. And I think what's interesting is that he uses the term pluralism. It's really living in a social context with different worldviews that we have to figure that out. And I guess he gets points for at least putting some language around that. So yeah, accordingly, traditional distinctions between subject and object are undone, and boundary definition becomes an issue not of systems modeling, but of practical philosophy. That is, it becomes an ethical issue. And I had not thought about that before, but that actually makes sense, right? Like how you view the Middle East depends on where you draw the boundary of who's good and who's bad, and what's right and what's wrong. And that is in some ways an arbitrary ethical boundary that you are choosing. Just like, the way you deal with AI, Ernest, right? You draw a line between this AI is tolerable and this AI is bad. And that is an ethical choice that you're making. And I'd forgotten that actually I've heard that the definition that practical philosophy is what is usually what people mean by ethics. Like our friends who run the ethics bowl, I may have mentioned in the past, where they have these people debating ethical scenarios. That is done by the Association of Practical Philosophers. And so to the extent that philosophy is practical, they define it as helping communities define ethical rules and ethical principles for making decisions. And that's interesting. I never thought of language as applied ethics, but in some sense, it is, because you're saying, and maybe that's one of the things that always was uncomfortable for me about language, is it felt like there was a assumption about this is where we're drawing the line of who to consider and where we care about. And it had the appearance of being an objective inference, but in reality, it is sort of an ethical choice of who we listen to and what we care about. And I think I didn't quite, at least for me, that was one of the discomforts. And it felt like I was unconsciously making that ethical choice rather than consciously acknowledging the moral ambiguity that we were defining away.
This is a good point, and thank you for making it. I had not, but like I think you admitted it yourself, I hadn't thought that the moment we draw systems boundaries, we are into an ethics territory by exclusion of whatever we excluded. Yeah, very
Yeah, and I think that in the business
I need to
context,
pursue that a little bit.
yeah, and I think in the business context, it's easier because there's a natural boundary. We are working, the firm is the client, they have their goals and their values. We can just assume that. But when you get more into the political and the communal or even the personal space, those boundaries become challenging. And what's interesting, going back to our question of datocracy, is those very questions are becoming difficult, in that it used to be, well, just assume a nation state and assume that the registered voters are the legitimate stakeholders, and that's what we can focus on. But in the modern world, who counts as a registered voter is a contentious issue in some communities. Whether the nation state is allowed to act in its own interest, or whether there needs to be, universal human rights or externalities that are in consequences of. And, is the nation state even going to be around in 20 years? And do we care about future generations? These are all questions that were maybe implicit in the past, but because we are so interconnected, because we live in a time of possibly dramatic consequences for the future, these are live issues where, like, anytime I try to make a simple decision about a simple topic, all this other stuff gets dragged in whether I wanted to or not. And people's emotional values get triggered because they're worried about something important to them being excluded from the system under conversation. And that's just me trying to discuss whether to retile the kitchen with my wife, never mind trying to figure out how to bring peace to the Middle East.
Yeah.
I just recently wrote a paper on ethics, which I've sent by email for long-term consideration, and I put it in the chat, parts of it. 10 practical and cheap strategies for ethical systems planning.
Now, here's an interesting claim, which I didn't really notice before that, is that the ultimate meaning of a systems approach is the creation of a theory of a deception. How do we deceive ourselves, and perhaps how do others deceive us? And in order to design a system, you're really trying to figure out where the lies are. And I think like that's one of the strengths of language, right? I can lie to myself about what it is I'm doing and whether it has any consequences. And having a rigorous formal system is a great way to flush out lies. It's also a great way to hide even bigger lies through the appearance of rigor and objectivity.
I must write a paper, how to lie and deceive with language.
Yes.
I repeat, I discovered that recently, I think it was last year, I wrote a paper on ethics and language. So I have sent you guys a copy of it, number one, and I put 2 pages of it, 2 sets of principles in the chat. So I've got some 10 practical and cheap strategies for ethical systems planning. What do you do if you're ethical? And I've got 10 of them, and these are language in practice.
Right. So here's a question. So if I understand his critique correctly, and I'm curious whether you talk about this, is that his idea is that the goal is to surface the implicit worldview assumptions of the system designer, so that they can be questioned. And that sort of meta critique is an interesting perspective. And his claim is that this is really the core point of pragmatism, is that you may think your assumptions are the correct one, are self-evident axioms, but it's only as we create the space to question them that we actually become ethical. Actually, I would love to see that essay on how to lie and deceive with language, and what to do about it, right? Because I think that would, that was the thesis I had, was that there's something before you draw the boundary for language, which is a very emotional process. And from this place, actually an ethical process. And it gets very much back to this idea of Ernest that we started with way back in Datocracy, as a community creates a rigorous statement of its values, and then other communities can look at it to see whether its actions and behaviors match those values, so we can decide whom to trust. And it is very much this idea of what exactly is your foundational assumptions, and making them explicit so other people can judge you by their consequences. Feels very similar to this of how to maybe how to avoid unintentionally lying with language or formal systems in general. And what's interesting is that, and I should maybe invite my friend Rohit, I may have mentioned it before, he may have showed up for one of these in the past. He's working hard on how to, very much the question you asked, Ernest, is if I have an AI agent, how do I know who authorized the agent to do this in a way that is rigorous enough that they can't wriggle out of it? Right? I actually want to say, like, and it's a delicate balance of not wanting to be so painful and convoluted that the user just clicks through like on a click wrap, and so broad and naive that, it's fair to say that this user had no idea what they were doing. And finding that sweet spot of, yeah, this, like a good example is Plaid, which does banking transactions. And it used to be you would just give your username and password to any random third-party app so they could log in as you. But instead, you go through Plaid, and Plaid says, okay, I authorize this account to do this one thing, and for only $50 and no more. And so this idea of fine-grained permissions that matches the user's current intent, and they say, oh yeah, that's the thing I want to do right now. And this idea of how do you create a world of universally well understood fine-grained permissions that so that users can say, I precisely authorize this agent to do this. And it's maybe the flip side of how do I trust a community. The how to trust communities are the macro problem. Like, I want to trust this organization if I want to join it or interact with it. But the converse to say, well, I don't actually trust these people very much, but I do trust them to solve this one problem for me in this really bounded context. And then if I trust those systems over time, I might develop a general trust for them as a system as a whole. And this idea of fine-grained trust and precisely articulating that is an interesting topic that feels like it, and I don't know if it's possible or not, but it feels like it might illuminate some of these questions.
Yeah, this might feel obvious, but like in my thoughts of AI, the AI used by TVs versus the AI used in Google. In TVs, the scope is very limited. It's like colors and scene layout, whatever. So not only that, but the consequences are not life and death or knowledge even. It's just okay how an image looks on the screen. Maybe on this TV they look more realistic because they had more testing and they used a wide variety of images and videos to train it versus a TV that is you see the colors are not good, the people with different races are rendered incorrectly. It whatever happens, it's still just a TV that you show images with. But when it comes to like you cannot take that into Google and say, hey, the information we are giving you is not math, because we're trying to map concepts to values, and then assigning all those things with words, and hopefully with a lot of data you can come up with answers that or information that is helpful. But when it's not, that's the problem. That people are coming to are beginning to trust these systems, but when they mess up, there can be serious consequences. So you're talking about a framework where we can tell agents what to do or what permissions to have. It would be great to have like a global framework that everything is compatible. Like I can deal with people in Russia and North Korea, South Korea, with a shared set of permissions, so that my answers are tailored to me and the answers of somebody else are tailored to them, and the misunderstandings are reduced. But right now we have all kinds of systems, we have NVIDIA, we have Microsoft, we have OpenAI, all these different things. I don't know if there's a like a common model that you can plug in together. Maybe there is. Can the OpenAI systems work with Microsoft systems or with the Facebook systems? To me they look different, and each one of them is trying to, hey, this is the best. This is best for whatever. But you still have to marry yourself to one of them, or right? You have to deal with different things. And like you have to trust. You have to okay, I have to invest some time to be able to trust certain systems. And if you make that easy, that would be great. But right now, it's not that easy. And I'm thinking of in a practical sense, I am thinking about, okay, how do we have these people. People say on the record, politicians or whatever, they put this thing on the record or for the record, blah blah blah. But what's the record? What's is anybody keeping track of those phrases? And then, okay, oh, he said it on the record, so I'm so that means something. But we don't keep that. There's no record of these politicians. Oh, every time he says on the record, you know, uh, 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 we.
Well, to be fair, on the record means that somebody can used to mean someone could publish it in a formal, print or in a journalistic outlet, right? As opposed to off the record stuff where they're supposed to delete it, right?
Yeah.
And so, but the very fact that it was published and you heard about it meant it was on the record. But what you're saying, of course, is no one aggregates all of those things into an easily consumable and verifiable system.
Yeah, and to me, that's just language. It's not. There's a lot of chances to misuse it, right? Misquote it or
because
whatever.
there's no system there's no closed loop system where you can actually see whether the consequences match the promise.
Yeah, we have something like in Senate and in the Congress, they when laws are passed, it's recorded, right?
The congressional record, yeah.
Yeah, so that I'm thinking of something to access that record, codify it and make it easy for people to understand, because usually those things are written in some esoteric language that is difficult for people to understand. But if we have a system that, okay, this collects the official records of every politician or functionary, and it's like a big Wikipedia thing or database that politicians cannot get away from their actual record. Like right now, people say, oh,
yeah. Of course, the reality is that right now politicians, it's not a lack of information about the politicians' actions that seems to be a factor, right? Because lots of politicians, there are plenty of facts that they've done these horrible things, and their supporters just don't care. Right?
Yes.
You can't solve the problem just with more information.
Well, maybe with accurate information, like.
No, I mean, no. There are lots of people who believe things that are trivially falsifiable. I mean, you and I both know that, right? We've seen what's happened over the last 8 years, and so yes, that would be a nice thing to have, but information in the absence of emotion doesn't lead to action. And frankly, most of the political problems we have, I would argue that people's emotions are so strong that they literally they are afraid that if they consider an alternative truth claim, that they will lose everything. And therefore they actively work hard to unthink things. There's a wonderful book called The Fall by Neil Stephenson, where there's a hoax that a town in Utah was blown up by an atomic bomb. And there's this really beautiful social media campaign that convinced people that was the case. And literally, the anti-realists have a fence around the town warning people that it has been blown up by radioactive waste. And they try to keep people out of the town, even though the town actually still exists. But their belief is so strong that they will not turn around and walk 100 yards to see that the town exists. And, this was written as sort of a parody, but that reality is not that far from our current truth. Is that people are afraid of facing the consequences of more accurate beliefs. And so just giving them better information is not a problem. It's interesting, that's actually my next meeting, thinking about the fact that the hard part is creating an environment where people feel emotionally safe enough to question their foundational axioms. right? They've built up a system based on implicit assumptions that they're the good guys and that these values are worth fighting for. And to question those axioms, like, kudos to Tom for willing to accept the fact that language might actually have some ethical and epistemic challenges that he needs to explore further. Most people aren't willing to do that, most of the time. And I'd like to think that either he's a great guy or also we built a level of trust where he's willing to do that. So that's the interesting thing. So anyway, we need to wrap up and I need to get to my next meeting. I would like to invite my friend to come and talk about this ethics of fine-grained permissions, because I think it's a practical one about, how could or should we trust AI? The question of how do we solve the larger, truth record is a bigger one. I'm not quite sure I'm ready to tackle that one yet, though it may come up. And I think the issue of not just proactively trusting AI, but how do we audit the AI? And once we do that for AI, maybe we can start doing that for humans.
Yeah. I want to start at the bottom, official records and nothing else. Just stick to that. And then like a dictionary, we have dictionaries and encyclopedias that most people take as, the knowledge that we know.
Right, but only because it doesn't matter in practice. As I have found out, if you try to hold people to a dictionary definition in an emotionally charged environment, it will end very badly for me. Right.
And that's what I like about language, that, you can go to extremes, like define every single word that you're using in this document. And these are the definitions that I'm working with. We can do that. But then it will be will make the document really, really difficult to read.
Right, and this is the thing is that is not an objective act. That is an ethical act. I am choosing to use this definition in this context for these people, and in many ways, as you may have noticed, that is an act of power in organizations, where they will say that this word means this, and you can't use it to mean that. That's where a lot of the tensions with DEI. Is people fighting over who gets to define those words. And we can't ignore the power and the ethics.
One of my favorite topics, the misuse of words.
And what do you mean by misuse? Does that mean using it different than the common usage, or your usage, or what the receiver intends or expects?
Oh my God. Topic for next time.
All right.
But I will send you a paper on my position on words, put it that way. Okay. And then you will have a think about what we're going to do. But it's something I've used in language in formulating my language glossary. So you're going to get that.
It auto-corrected how to lie with language to how to lie with language, and those two are closely related. So
yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Good fun.
All right, gentlemen, this has been great. I will see if my friend is able to join us November. We are scheduled for, I think, the week before Thanksgiving. Let's see what the date on that is. The 15th, yeah. So I think that's still a decent time slot for me. And then maybe we'll take December off because things get a little crazy. We'll see. But look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
All right.
Great conversation.
Okay.
Talk to